What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we need to be taking a look at a banned Final Fantasy card. That's right, we look at banned Pokemon cards on my other channel, PTCG Radio. We've looked at some banned Dragon Ball cards on this channel. We've even looked at a banned Transformers card. But for the first time, we get to look at a banned Final Fantasy card. Now, to be fair, Danaluma did get banned just weeks ago, and I'm sorry, for various reasons I didn't cover that at the time. You have my apologies, and as way of an apology, might I offer you a discussion on Rikku from Opus 1, who has just been announced as banned. Now, it is going to be banned as of September the 13th of this year, and it will coincide with the release of the upcoming Wraith vs. Knight 2-player starter set, which we looked at some cards from that starter set recently. I'll pop a link to that video in the description. Cool. So what does Rikku do then? Well, it's a 2-cost wind backup, and you can pay 1 CP and dull it to force your opponent to put 1 card from the top of his or her deck into the break zone. Or you can discard another Rikku from your hand with the S ability, pay a wind and dull it, and your opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her deck into the break zone, and you then draw a card. Mug indeed. So why is this so gosh darn good? Well, here's the official statement from Square Enix. Due to changes in the game landscape, such as the increased number of cards that can activate characters, the relative strength of Rikku as a card has grown substantially, compared to when it was originally released at the time of Opus 1. Now, this card by itself allows a player to pare down their opponent's deck, mitigating the need for multiple cards with effects that allow them to put cards from the deck onto the break zone. Consequently, players can readily fulfill a condition of victory that we believe should not be easy. That is, your opponent becomes unable to draw a card. Therefore, we have determined at this time that this card will be banned. And they go on to say that given that the European Championship, North American Championship, and Masters Final are all coming up in October, they wanted to address this as soon as possible. Now, this to me is very interesting, coming from a number of other card games. Looks like Square Enix doesn't want mill decks. Over in Pokemon, mill decks are just a thing. We play mill decks, though they're not as good now as they used to be. In games like the Transformers card game and Keyforge, milling isn't an option because when you run out of deck, you just shuffle your discard pile and put it back as your deck. Scrap pile if you're playing Transformers. Here it seems like Square Enix isn't a fan of this. And I know I'm not the first person to point this out, but the biggest issue with Rikku seems to be it doesn't say once per turn. Or limit 1 per turn. The problem is you dull her in order to use this ability. Cool. But if you can then reactivate her, she can do it again and again and again, and it says as much in the ban. Now, I started digging through some deck lists from recent Crystal Cups from last month, and these Wind and Wind-Water decks, they tend to be playing Rikku, but they don't seem to be playing really any other mill. And I think that is incredibly significant. People are basically deciding that, you know what, this is enough mill, though incidentally it is Wind-Water that seems to play a bit more Rikku than Mono Wind. Okay, so we talk about different ways to activate Rikku to just reuse this ability over and over again. And I mean, at this stage, I'm going to mention Aerith, right? Aerith, probably my favourite Final Fantasy character. And we've actually got 2 options. We've got the one from way back in Opus 1. When she enters the field, choose 1 backup you control other than Aerith and activate it. But then we can go completely the other way into the Aerith from Opus 8. Okay, not the most recent set, but not far off. And when she hits the break zone, you activate all of your backups. I mean, that's going to help, and that does include Rikku here. Though the Opus 8 seems to play a bit more play than the Opus 1. That is, of course, not the only option we've got here. We've got Diabolus, which sees a fair amount of play. It is a summon. You select up to 2 of the 4 following actions, one of which is activate all the backups you control. Well, that's going to help if you're trying to reuse Rikku over and over again. A card that we see popping up in these Crystal Cup lists quite a lot is the Pain. Specifically the one from Opus 1. Again, the very first set. When it enters a field, choose up to 3 backups you control. If you control a Rikku, you activate them. But you should. And to be honest, if you don't control a Rikku, you can't activate Rikku because you don't control her anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Although incidentally, there is another Pain that does see a fair amount of play, though usually as a one-off. And that is the one from Opus 2, just one set later. When Pain enters a field, you may search for a Yuna or Rikku and add it into your hand. So let's just say it helps a little bit to actually get yourself rolling there. Now, a card that we've had for quite a while here is Valifor, which again is an Opus 1 card, as so many of these are. A 2-cost summon, deal 3,000 damage to all the 4s your opponent controls. If you control Yuna, activate all the backups you control. Now, that's actually become more relevant recently, because in Opus 9, we just got another Porom. And it's a 2-cost Ford. Now, it is water, so you need to be playing this in a wind-water deck rather than mono-wind, but wind does see quite a lot of play with water, so you're fine in that regard. When it is put from the field into the break zone, choose a summon in your break zone and add it to your hand. Like that Valifor we just mentioned a second ago. Or even like Diabolos, who is a summon, and if it's in the break zone, you'll be fine. You'll be able to get it back quite nicely. And then you can play it again to go and use Rikku again. And then you get that little bit more milling. Now, this does see a bit of competition from the Opus 5 Porom, which is a forward with an EX burst. When it enters a field, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 card among them to your hand, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. But it also allows you to pay 1 and tap it to cancel an action ability. Yeah, this crops up here and there. And we do have the rule in Final Fantasy that unless you've got that specific symbol in the top right corner, you can only have 1 of each character on the field at a time. So you do have to make that decision. Though I suppose you want the Opus 9 for putting in the break zone from the field, at which point the field's clear of Porom, so go and play another one if you feel so inclined. There's also the Bartz from Opus 1 that we see popping up here and there. Has a nice little ability, which is an EX burst as well. And when it enters a field, you activate all the wind characters you control, forwards and backups. Oh look, Riku's wind. You're fine, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to be alright. And let's give one more example from the recent Opus 9, Yasmat. Again, apologies for my pronunciations of some of these. I'm trying my best. Now, it is a 9 cost, which is extremely expensive. But when it enters a field, or at the beginning of your main phase 1, you may choose 1 forward of cost 5 or more and break it, choose 1 monster and break it, or activate all of the characters you control. So, yeah, you get to reuse a little bit with that as well. And the point here is that all of these characters I'm telling you about, they all allow you to activate Rikku again and again. Which means that ability that she has, which in theory is being used once a turn, might be used multiple times per turn. Which means you're now milling multiple cards from your opponent's deck per turn and opening up a win condition that it seems fairly obvious from the announcement that Square Enix do not want us to have and exploit. Now, incidentally here, that does open the door now for other Rikku. Remember the rule I mentioned a moment ago? Only 1 of each character can be on the field. You don't see a huge amount of overlap, though I did give you the example of Pain, where people generally tend to play 3 of the really good one and 1 of the searchy one. But we do open up, and what a lot of people are mentioning here is the Rikku from Opus 2. It's a 2-cost wind backup, so in that regard it's the same. but when it enters a field, you activate all the forwards you control. It's not a replacement in terms of milling, but remember that we've got the pain that if you control Rikku, you can activate free backups. We've got other cards that want you to specifically be playing Rikku, therefore you probably want a new one. The one from Opus 2 will do the trick. It's good, though it doesn't provide quite the same niche. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is the ban. I mean, is it a good ban? Really? That comes down to one simple question. How much do you like mill decks? If you're a fan of mill decks and you think they should be in the game, this is not a good ban because this leads to a good mill deck. If you're not a fan of mill decks and think you'd much rather see games won by life being depleted, then this is an excellent ban. Really is as simple as that. But I would very much like to know what you think about this ban, ladies and gentlemen. So please do let me know in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter @TheWassy, where we talk, well, games. Pretty much whatever games I feel like. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wassy Plays.